Thank you so much. We also have a question from Amnon. I want to see if we have another question before I see how we answer it. Do we have any other questions? I asked you in the chat before, but I can't see it now. I'm not near my computer.
Should I ask very briefly and maybe also respond quickly to Shimon's question? So my question actually is to you, Karen, and also to Gali to some extent. I wonder if it's necessary to think about it as a judicial model versus the managerial model. I wonder what work does this analytical distinction do? Because I think and again, that was my proposal in my presentation, I think your findings are hugely important. I cannot understate their importance, but I think they fit better in the understanding of what due process means. What does it mean? What does it mean for us to have due process? And I think this is what Shimon actually was responding to, because he was saying, look, if you give more resources, you get better due process. So to the extent we care about better reasoning, to the extent we care, even if the plaintiff wins or doesn't win, that's an added value. But even if the results were the same, to the extent we care about trust and diffuse support and all the stuff that Daniela in her recorded talk about as the third pillar, which is internalizing the value of resolving disputes through law, which means also a reasoned decision that people can then understand that we actually were heard in a manner that we felt was adequate, then I think you can leave it at that. I don't think, I'll put it differently. I think even if the administrative model was correct, you could still justify your findings by saying, surely it's about better management. The management is just about better staffing or more judges, or it's just a different, they got it wrong under the same model. They just had to have a different pipeline to get the service out, whether it's more doctors or more nurses or MRIs, if you refer it to the healthcare. With respect to what Shimon was saying, so that's a question for you. Also, a very quick question to Gali. I wonder, what do we do with the CEPEJ? So the CEPEJ is a wonderful idea, but the question is how to relate the various segments, and it relates also to Shimon's question of CEPEJ. So we measure how much time it takes for judge to resolve this case or that case. And then what? Does it tell us something about the trust in the judiciary, the quality, should we change something? Should we change some procedure, this, that, and the other? What are the normative consequences? With respect to Shimon's question, I want to have a practical sentence maybe considered for the bounds corpus standards. And that has to do, again, with only with the question of judicial independence per se or non-dependence per se. And that is, it could also be part of the scoreboard of the EU, but I have no pretensions of affecting that. And that is the ability to capture the system. Because if we measure non-dependence, if we view it from the outside, then how easy it is, or jurisdictions should consider when they allocate checks and balances, whether it's a judicial model or administrative model, whether it's centralized, localized, they should consider how easy it is to capture the system, either by politicians or by interest groups or some other forces that are antithetical to the idea of the rule of law. Thank you.
Well, I think that the judicial workload index is actually the basis to understanding the workload, understanding the differences in the different instances, different courts, different case types. I think it's important. I think something Amnon said in the beginning about measuring, I think it's important to measure. I think we need to measure. I think we can't base everything on the measurements. We have to be very careful when we use numbers as a basis to decisions. Of course, we want evidence-based policy. We want to base it on data, but it's not the only thing. So I think for us to continue to understand where we need more judges, that's one question. What else needs to be done? Is there enough time for certain types of cases? Is there something wrong with the way the case is proceeding? Where are there like blockages maybe in the way that the proceeding is handled? I think a basis is to understand how long these cases take, to kind of weight them. So I think it's only the beginning. I think comparing ourselves to Europe is one way of looking and trying to understand, because you can say, especially in connection to what Karen said in her study about needing more judges, first of all, we need to base ourselves on data. We can come and say that we're overloaded as many times as we want. If we can show how overloaded or how much workload is on our judges, that's the place to start. But I think that our system isn't only asking for judges. I don't think that's the only option that is being used. You can see that a lot of work, I think in some of the studies that I've presented, there's a lot of work being done. I think that the managerial approach is, nobody's saying it's only the judicial approach and the only answer is adding judges. There's a lot of work being done to see how to improve the processes themselves, to better the process, to lead to due process, and to get better outcomes. So I think it's a combination. I think that it's only the basis, the CEPEJ information. I think that we don't want to have too much, to base ourselves too much on numbers, but they are a base for us to start. And of course, qualitative data is very important to add to that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Shimon and Amnon, for your questions. I'm going to answer you both together. What do the results of my study say? I want to break it down to efficiency and due process and justice, basically, or the correct answer. So when it comes to efficiency, and again, I showed my results to NAOTSAR, to the Ministry of Finance people, and they said this is a definitive proof that we do not need to appoint more judges. We see that if we appoint them, they still work. It's not that they go home and rest in the time that they now have. They do work, but they work in an inefficient manner. Why do we want them to write so much in small claims? Okay, that's what they understand from this, and perhaps they're right, but I disagree. I actually agree with both your points about the due process. But before I move to the due process or procedural justice, as I think it should be more aptly called, I want to talk about just justice, about the correct answer. I really can't say if judges that had more time got the correct answer more frequently, because I have no idea who was supposed to win, if the plaintiff or the defendant were correct in their point of views. I just don't know. I just know that once they had more time, the plaintiffs won more, but I don't know if that's a better result when you're speaking about justice or not. But what I do know, and I completely agree with both of you, is that it's better procedural justice. It's better due process. If both sides of the case are heard more by the judge, because we see this had an effect on the number of hearings and number of testimony that were heard. Once judges had more time, they heard more testimonies, had more hearings, and wrote more. So this, I'm quite definite in my conclusion that this increases procedural justice. Okay? The sense of the litigants that they were heard, that their case were thoroughly thought of. And I think in a democratic system, that's supremely important, especially in this age where trust is decreasing in courts. So even if it's less efficient, I think in the long term, it's a better way of coping today. But actually, my recommendation is not to appoint more judges. but rather take out of the court systems cases that should not be there. I think our court system in Israel, at least, and I know it happens in many other places, deals with cases that shouldn't be in, for example, there are cases that are dealt in the criminal procedures. There are just things like parking in the wrong places, or taking your trash out in the wrong day, or not leashing your dog. These are things that should not be dealt with in a complete criminal process. It's not only time-consuming. I think handling these kind of cases also increases the emotional workload on judges when there are people that are highly educated, very smart, and confident people, and then they have to sit for days and days on and hear about civil cases of 1,000 shekels between one insurance company and another, for example, or doing these criminal procedures for completely normative people. So I would actually prefer to work on workloads in the side of the cases and not of the judges, and I can speak more about that later. The last point is about the criminal procedures, because Shimon raised a question: if this happens in civil cases, what happens in the criminal cases? What effects do the overburden and judges, how do they decide differently in criminal cases? And I think it is more worrying than civil cases, especially more worrying than small claims. So I'm now starting a study in a natural experiment also, and this is an actual natural experiment, in the criminal procedures, where I look what happens to court units where one of the judges goes to maternity or paternity leave. So if judges have maternity or paternity leave, they stop their cases. They don't hear any cases for around 4 months, usually 5 months, because they extend their maternity or paternity leave. And then all their cases are transferred to other judges. So again, I can see what happens not to the judges that have their leave, but to the judges in the court. That's completely random, hopefully, right? Hopefully this is completely random. The judges have no effect whatsoever on their colleagues going to maternity or paternity leave. And this happens mostly in criminal procedures, just because most judges going on leave, according to my data, are criminal judges. And I'm starting to collect data and see what happens to the verdicts and the severity of the verdicts when judges are more and less overworked. So I'll write about that, hopefully, if I find anything interesting. Do we have any more questions? Okay. So thank you so much again, Shimon, for the conference at large and for this panel, for inviting us all, and see you in later panels. Thank you.